Thank you very much for inviting me today. Very kind of you. Lots of hard work. I'd like to thank particularly Iris, Niels, and Christian, who've been in brilliant contact with me. And thank you for bringing me to this really interesting place and to Brussels. I haven't been for some years for obvious reasons. And I really look forward to talking to many of you during the day. As I think we know, the struggle to find more sustainable futures for major societal and environmental problems is faced globally at all levels in societies and communities. Although it is clear that some people, places and countries are and will be more vulnerable than others. I think this is a critical time for all of us who have an interest in and perhaps power to influence landscape policy, planning and management. I believe that landscape approaches have the potential to drive and manage change in landscapes that can have significant impact on many people, as well as the landscapes they dwell within. Such change needs to be considered as potentially transformative for both landscapes and communities. That is, a change for the better. This presentation reports on recent research relating to English policymaking based around the idea that landscape approaches can be agents of change to benefit both people and landscapes. The first project I will discuss develops this thinking, and the second developed an integrative tool that focuses on how landscape approaches can provide the starting point towards achieving common ground for partnership building for policymakers, scientists, practitioners, and for achieving meaningful engagement with other stakeholders and communities. Both of the projects I refer to today were based on work for Natural England, the UK's agency for managing and monitoring landscapes and natural systems in England. A number of difficult questions arise from this work, and finding actual answers to these questions is, of course, also more difficult. So what I aim to do is to identify some key issues that I hope, be relevant for the discussions that we have today. Many landscapes can be described as ordinary or in-between landscapes. Landscapes often apparently forgotten by policymakers, and in some cases crisis-prone with vulnerable communities that feel they're not listened to. There are many of these in the UK, and some landscapes are framed as ordinary when they actually have special values for the communities that live there. A key issue here is to consider how different disciplines, sectors, communities and groups frame both the landscapes as ordinary or special, and also frame the issues that arise in those landscapes. In the northeast of England, the Durham coast, which I show here, was for many years the site for dumping coal spoil, resulting in black beaches and black water. This has been physically transformed through landscape restoration projects over a number of years into a beautiful, biodiverse landscape. Changing the framing of the area has been much more difficult, and one that I've been involved in over some years. Framing indicates the values of the person, the community, discipline, or organization, or a principle of organization that directs the significance we give to public actions. Disciplinary frames are often learned. Frames are also dynamic. They can change. They are often established at particular moments in time or a result of cultural and historical time frames. The frames are often not easy to discern. Action that creates transformational change in landscapes can also be described as an agent of change or a change that can reframe landscapes. As we know, policy, planning and management, and I think you're all involved in this in some way, have all the potential to transform and reframe landscapes. But it helps if that frame is explicit. our policy should reflect the way we collectively frame landscapes and the shared values we hold concerning landscapes. There's a general acknowledgement in policy, practice and academia that the complexity of environmental issues and the need to address real-world problems requires knowledge from many different discipline areas, a point supported by the European Landscape Convention. But a key issue is to consider the boundaries that affect our work and the way we, as different disciplines, sectors with many priorities and values, how we can cross those boundaries. In public policy and landscapes, the idea and problem of boundaries, and it's not something new or strange. Boundaries are all around us, both physical and administrative. At least understanding different framings of landscapes can help us cross disciplinary and policy boundaries. And I know today we're talking very much about landscape approaches. So these two understandings about framing and boundaries are, I think, critical in identifying the benefits of a landscape approach. A landscape approach can help us develop common frames that we all understand, or at least understand different frames, and help us recognize and cross boundaries in our work. There's no one landscape approach identified in the academic literature, but the term is identified primarily as a practical and often strategic method and/or process of landscape planning, design, and management, by which the multiple concepts, principles, and definitions of landscape are employed. That is, scalar, temporal, conceptual, and practical. An integrated landscape approach has gained traction, particularly within the developing country and conservation literature. Landscape approaches can be used as drivers for, as well as managers of, change. The Future Options project for Natural England emerged as a result of an identification of some need for forward thinking in landscape policy. It was a collaborative project between a small group of academics, practitioners, and policymakers to highlight the opportunities and potential of integrated mechanisms, approaches, and new style designations that could help landscapes realize their full potential as well as protect them. We established the framing of the project at the outset of the study by identifying 6 principles, and I want to talk about 3 of these. A key principle was based around the growing importance of systems thinking in many areas of environmental planning and the need to explore this further within the development of landscape planning and management. Currently, systems thinking focuses on systems within the landscape rather than the landscape as a system. There is potential here for a nested approach. So I've identified in this diagram some of the different systems that I'm sure will be familiar to you. The cultural, which is so embedded within landscape thinking, however, is often lost in systems thinking. An important benefit of thinking in terms of systems is the understanding related to landscape change, that system behavior is not wholly predictable, and that systems are dynamic and continuous adaptation is commonly found. Any new policy for landscapes should be based on the understanding that while top-down legal approaches may be necessary to achieve certain objectives, it is essential to find ways of developing buy-in from stakeholders in the landscape, both communities, organizations, and others, and yourselves, of course. In particular, collaborative approaches that recognize that all landscapes matter and help develop strategies for what approaches and options will be appropriate to which place. Other benefits can be about transforming attitudes and self-belief of communities relating to landscape changes, so that there can be transformation from what my colleague Clive Davis calls from NIMBYs to YIMBYs, or not in my backyard to yes in my backyard. The principle of a whole landscape approach is to me the real crux of what is meant by a landscape approach. It builds on other principles. The diagram here shows different possible natures that identify the relationships and interactions between people and natural processes. This principle is about a framing that removes the idea of nature versus culture that is so pervasive and I feel so unhelpful. A whole landscape approach would demand the development of a more comprehensive assessment of landscape potential, including new mapping, not just in a conventional sense, but an exercise that would capture all the dimensions of landscapes that we discussed in our report and I'm sure are familiar to you. We were then asked to identify future options for strategic thinking in landscapes. We identified 12 possible options. Again, I don't have time to go through all of these, but I will pick out some key points and give you a flavour of the thinking in the report. So the first was a big, bold approach based around the concept of the importance of opening up access for as many people as possible and providing myriad opportunities for ecological enhancement, addressing climate change impacts and commitments such as the 30% of protected land for nature recovery by 2030, which our government has and still today holds to. The proposal would create two new types of common land. Our legal definition of common land is quite complicated, and the principle is primarily about access to landscapes. But the two ideas illustrated here would create large areas of multifunctional green spaces and corridors, and we've called them the living edge and coherent coasts. The living edge would include all eligible areas in England, regardless of any existing designation around our towns and cities. However, for the avoidance of doubt, the vast majority of such land is not designated currently, and so there would be substantial gain. Coherent coasts is a direct parallel to the idea of the living edge and would operate in the same way and under the same legislative framework. However, unlike the living edge, the entire English coastland would be defined regardless of population density. Another option was to consider access in the form of routes in the landscape. There's considerable potential for increasing routes. I gather there is somewhat of a concentration in Flanders on routes as well. But also in improving the quality of those routes and the quality of the experience of existing routes to achieve multiple objectives. Importantly, for people's health and well-being, as well as for biodiversity. This option suggests that a comprehensive review is needed of all kinds of existing and potential routes. Very little work has been done on the historic development of routeways in the UK and how they can be used to enable new ways of seeing and knowing landscapes, as well as other obvious benefits to nature. There are many linked issues with routes, including proving the quality of existing routes, and also how access to landscapes are measured, and understanding of linear routes as green spaces, which is not done currently. We also recommended what we called a Tranquility Plus project that responds to the desire for access to greater tranquility, forest bathing examples, etc., within urban centres and urban fringes in particular, but across the landscape continuum at a countrywide scale. A new focus on revealing lost and ghost landscapes would aim to address the loss of landscape features and forms, knowledge, skills, practices, meanings, and relationships, including ecological and human loss. There are many lost or hidden features, such as rivers, ponds, and roots in landscapes, but also lost relationships, commonly remaining only, for example, in painting and songs, former sounds, smells, and tastes remaining in literature, recipes, stories, and place names. Developing this with a systems thinking approach could achieve multiple benefits that captures past, present, future systems, capturing fluidity, movement, processes, and landscape permeability, and capturing ghost biodiversity in the exciting study that revealed former ponds and their ecosystems in Norfolk by Emily Alderton, illustrated on the left of this slide. There's also potential for considerable community building and citizen landscape science initiatives, I think, with this idea, as well as connections to schools. A key issue that we discussed is long-term support and management mechanisms for landscapes. We identified the potential to create an English landscape trust which would have transformative potential and a milestone achievement without needing new legislation. This would be based on similar models, but principally focused on so-called ordinary landscapes that are meaningful for local people, but also in need of various degrees of landscape-led regeneration. The trust would have various other functions, and its success would be judged on its ability to deliver measurable landscape outcomes, not just outputs, based on performance indicators. A key future responsibility will be to manage the new commons proposal that I've already discussed. We had lots of good diagrams in this report. Two further options are based on the need for support for initiatives. They're really based on the understanding that no one solution will work. In terms of local management models, a number of different local landscape partnerships need to be examined. These are all based on existing or past models of working that have produced landscape change. Further types of accreditation could be useful as ways of encouragement to achieve required quality standards in landscape, and link nicely, I think, with the objectives of the European Landscape Convention. The idea here really is that we need what we call a dynamic shopping basket of tools. The tendency for policy in the UK is to identify one big idea rather than a range of possible solutions that need to be piloted. And we need to get away from this limited and risky approach, not just in landscapes, I would suggest. New approaches to the landscape and new designations require a focus. The idea that much of the English landscape is shaped by agriculture alone is no longer a viable policy or reality. Much of the landscape is determined by urbanization, by mobility, by tourism, leisure, and many other things. Whilst food production must remain a key feature with the rise of industrial agriculture and other methods, the time has arrived to move away from this simple paradigm. Some drivers of change I have already mentioned, but some other important ones are managing the landscape for carbon storage, better management for resilience in landscapes, holistic planning and management of water features, the idea of waterscapes. We must focus on green infrastructure policies and interventions. I want now to move on and give you a flavour of the second project. This All England Strategic Mapping project emerged from the recommendations of the first. It was based on a significant data gathering exercise and responded to the question, how can potential options in landscapes be examined for developing common ground, for partnership building for policymakers, scientists, practitioners, and for achieving meaningful engagement with other stakeholders and communities. In order to examine the options in the first project more clearly, a decision support tool was needed to assist landscape stakeholders. The project was based on two key areas of work. Firstly, stakeholder workshops and data gathering at various stages. Second, establishing a GIS platform, Geographic Information Systems platform, which was technical work to allow data about landscapes in England to be manipulated. This would inform high-level decisions. So the overall output is a digital map or interactive platform which provides evidence to identify potential areas for new landscape action, including designations for protection and priority areas for landscape planning and management, as well as to inform and support decisions about developing alternative landscape approaches and exploring the options we identified. I'm sorry about there's lots of text on these, but it's just to give you a flavour of some of the things we did. A key concern with regard to landscapes in policy at government level in the UK is the concept of natural beauty and how this can be protected, enhanced and created. This emerged most recently through a report that reviewed the policy approach to designated landscapes, known as the Glover Review of 2019. So the briefs for both the first and second project was mixed up with this perceived need by government to designate or protect particular areas of high value in landscapes. The tool provides a strategic and comparative view of the relative degree of natural beauty across the whole of England. It includes a strong recognition of the contribution of a rich and diverse biodiversity to natural beauty, mindful that our landscapes should be doing much more for nature than they are now. And importantly, it includes a comprehensive analysis of environmental and human need, taking account of factors such as deprivation, loneliness, minorities, mental health, air quality, access to green space, and much more. While I recognise that the brief from government for the project focused on these two areas, the tool can be used in a variety of different ways to explore not only where designations and alternative approaches could be located, but also the best approach for a specific location. This is an example of one of the maps that could be generated. The tool can be interrogated to provide an analysis of data and it provide evidence-based maps using current known and accessible sources of data. It's only as good as the underlying data and does not capture people's perceptions of landscapes. It shows broad spatial patterns at a national All England scale. It cannot be drilled down to give detailed site-level information. It was undertaken in a very short timescale, 6 months, and an economic budget, with the aim of producing a pragmatic, fit-for-purpose tool. It is intended to provide a starting point for analysis, and questions were developed, which at the bottom here, in conjunction with stakeholders to test the platform. Hang on. Yeah, those are the questions. It can provide information to help answer the where, or where could these places be, but does not provide answers on the what. I.e., what type of landscape approaches are required, and the how, i.e., the mechanisms that would enable such landscape approaches to be successfully delivered. The tool provides a snapshot in time. A program review and updating will enable longer-term use of the tool. This seems like a fairly straightforward project, based on well-known and well-used GIS methods, but in fact, the range of data that was collected had not been collected so comprehensively before, which is quite surprising. So moving quickly on to reflections, I know we haven't got much time today. I think it is exciting times for landscape, particularly for policy and practice. I think we also live in critical times. I sometimes wonder whether the last 30 years of working towards more sustainable landscapes have gone for me. But actually, I do feel that just at the moment, there's a bit of a window for landscape, notwithstanding the political situation in the UK at the moment. The problem is that politics, economics, and emergency conditions may slam that window shut before we can get enough done and get through it. These projects show the importance of linking future-gazing work with more technical explorations. that allow us to examine mechanisms, and we do need both. We need some vision and creativity in order to address the terrible problems we currently face. And we need to forge ahead with pilots and tests, recognizing that landscape change will change people's lives as well as landscapes they live within. But the plans we make for change need to be strategic, iterative, and based on long-term thinking. We need to develop holistic landscape approaches. We need to work to change landscapes, but also to change the framing of landscapes to achieve transformational change. And recognize that there are a lot of unknown unknowns in landscape studies and practice. I think we need all the help we can get. There are enormous challenges for policy, decisions in a rapidly changing world, politically and ecologically. All the projects I'm currently working on involve transdisciplinary teams, can't say it, some with communities, artists, and many others. There's obviously a need to work at all different administrative levels and across different landscapes. Policy in the UK is changing rapidly, and these two projects were focused at very high strategic all-England policy level. They did not have the capacity to have direct involvement of communities, but I think they do show the enormous value of working collaboratively in partnership with practitioners, policymakers, and academics. And I mean really developing ways of working together deeply, not just having academics as add-on consultants. I think within such collaborations, it's important to allow exploratory work in order to develop different ways into the same problem. In landscape work, it's also critical that we tap into different types of knowledge and understandings, not just to pander to the endless requirement for scientific evidence, whatever that might be, which I'm afraid UK policymakers often require of us. There are some suggestions that we need to move towards post-disciplinary approaches, and this is what this diagram is all about, based on problem-focused working and flexible modes of knowledge production. It seems to me that this is already happening in the kind of projects based around landscape approaches, and I'll be interested to talk further with many of you, I hope, about the kind of initiatives that I gather are happening here in Belgium. And finally, I'd like to return to a quotation from Michael Dower from 1965. Michael has had a considerable impact on both landscape policy planning and management. He was Director General of the precursor of Natural England and was one of the instigators of the European Landscape Convention. He still works with his local community in Dorset, where he now lives. In 1965, he said, "3 great waves have broken across the face of Britain since 1800. First, the sudden growth of dark industrial towns. Second, the thrusting movement along far-flung railways. Third, the sprawl of car-based suburbs. Now we see, under the guise of a modest word, the surge of a 4th wave, which could be more powerful than all others. The modest word is leisure." That was 1965. The 4th wave, I think, has had considerable impact on UK landscapes, indeed on landscapes around the world, but I think we are now facing what we could identify as a 5th wave. The words are, to quote Michael Dower, less modest than the 4th. The 5th may be the transition of British society to one that lives in balance with what the earth can sustain. We can only hope. Indeed, many people have come to believe that the world is finally balanced between fragile survivability and catastrophe. There is increasing scientific evidence of a world under strain from human impacts, and every day the media is full of stories, locally and globally, that point in that direction. So what is the place of landscape in a 5th wave? Perhaps it might even be described in stark terms as landscapes for survival, with sustainability and resilience as the main drivers of change. New landscape approaches in a 5th wave could still value the conventional understanding of landscape as a physical place valued by people for its multiple functions, and aesthetic characteristics, but also one which is considered as a hard-edged socio-political tool related to how we shape, plan, and manage living landscapes to meet society's urgent needs in the face of the multiple impacts of anthropocentric global change. Such a view of landscapes could be rather radical than incremental, and urgent rather than everyday, functional as well as strategic. And I leave two questions with you. First, do we have the national courage for a radical approach to landscapes? And I believe that could relate not only to the UK, but to other countries. Secondly, what governance, legislative, and policy competencies are needed to address this fifth wave? And where does this lead in terms of designation and new approaches to landscapes? In my short summary for the talk today, I mentioned that I thought there was a struggle to find more sustainable futures for major societal and environmental problems. For over 15 years, I've worked directly with UK governments and their agents on trying to ensure that landscape policy has real teeth and that local communities can have a say in decisions about their landscapes. This feels like a struggle to me, and I don't see that struggle disappearing anytime soon in the UK or many other countries that I'm working in. Landscapes are our cultural mirrors. What we see happening in our landscapes reflects much of what is going on in our communities and our cultures. It reflects our history, our values and identities. I think there's a lot of hard work to do, but I do think there are exciting potential new policy stories to construct about landscapes, and many stories still to reveal, which tell of the values that communities hold of the landscapes they live within. Thank you very much.